Well, I have no idea if I'm even live because YouTube is a service. Oh, it looks like I've been live for 10 seconds. Reasonable. So, here we are. The big boys table has returned. I'm Pronago. Here's Mesk.
I see you typing, you dumb bitch.
Today we're dumb bitching about the Western mindset for episode 18. And I guess we can open up with my internet.
Very Western indeed.
So the internet issue is really funny. The reason why we haven't been doing podcasts or streams at all until 2 days ago, or yesterday, I guess, is precisely because I didn't have internet until yesterday for about a month and a half. I was only supposed to be gone for about a couple weeks, maybe 1 or 2 weeks, and then I was supposed to take care of everything myself. I was going to get this company, Verizon, to come in and install instead of Comcast. And because, funnily enough, the other issue that I don't even think I talked about is that if I wanted to reactivate my Comcast service, I actually would have had to pay somebody else's bill before they would reactivate it for this address.
What?
Even though it's not in my name and I'm not involved at all.
That reminds me. Someone I know who moved into an apartment, he got slammed with a huge, like $200, $300 lighting bill for a previous tenant, and it sounds very, very similar.
Yeah, I mean, it's all related.
That sounds insanely illegal. Like, how are you liable to pay for this shit? It doesn't make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense to me either, but because I lived at the address during the time of service, they were able to add that to the bill that I would have otherwise paid. Comcast is really weird too because they tried to get I guess in some states like Georgia and Maine. I don't know if there's like a reason why. Those two states were in particular singled out for this, but they did try to institute data caps here, and I guess they got really chewed
Canadian.
out. Yeah. So,
well, you would get chewed out in a first world country. In Canada, we just accept it. We're actually going to be, or at least they're trying to implement a copyright tax. So if you're not familiar with Canada, our CDs are about 10 times more expensive than DVDs. So back when you could buy a stack of DVDs off of NCIX before, I'll have to get into that because that's amusing too. Before they went bankrupt and gave everybody's credit card information to the Chinese. You can buy a stack of DVDs for like 20, 30 bucks. They give you like 50 DVDs. Well, for 20, 30 bucks, you could maybe get like 10 CDs.
why?
So CDs actually were arbitrarily more expensive because of a copyright tax. Because Canada feels that because if you use a CD, you're using it for pirating. So every single consumer for a CD has to pay a massive tax on top of it. So right now, what they're actually doing is they're literally saying, quoting word for word, if you use over 15 gigabytes of bandwidth of internet a month, you are pirating videos illegally. That is literally what they've said. So what that means is that every single person who uses the internet in Canada should be hit with a copyright tax and pay even more on their internet. And Canada already pays more for their internet than even the Middle East, than even Mexico. Like those countries actually have better service than pretty much all of Canada. There's only a very, very small handful of areas that are exception for that, in which you just get shitty service and like mediocre quality. So HKS, for example, he's on a line that's actually faster than any commercial line that I'm aware of within this country. And he pays about $120, $130, $150 for it. I pay $115 a month for a 3 Mbit upload and 400 gigabyte data cap. So, for example, I can't like watch streams or anything because they're so much larger than direct download videos. And like I would chew through that in a heartbeat, and I'll actually get fined if I go over it. So it's pretty crazy. So we didn't always have data caps, but people wanted data caps. So
I don't understand how. So they have a 400 gigabyte data cap, but if you use over 15 of those 400 gigabytes, you're considered a pirate and you have to pay a tax.
Yep. Yeah, that's what's in the court right now. Another thing that came out that's worth bringing into discussion momentarily is it was recently ruled in court that an ISP can sell your information to copyright trolls from the United States. So typically a copyright troll, they have a bot or something that goes into a tort network and they log your IP, and that may not even be your IP. If your IP is dynamic or somebody else used your router, it's one of those extremely like dubious things that's impossible to actually hold up in court, so they try to scare you with it, hence copyright trolling. but they actually need to get a hold of people connected to that IP address. Now, normally, you know, if you want someone's information off of an IP address or something, you need like a court order. You need like a I forget what it's called, but you need a court order to do it. Um, well, now the ISPs have said, "Hey, if you pay us, we'll give you all the information you could possibly want." So that's like Canada is an incredibly scummy country. I just can't wait until Trudeau is thrown out and another religious, insane person of the totally different variety gets thrown back in, and they start unhooking some of this insanity we have done. But until then, yeah, bandwidth caps and stuff like that are basically just accepted as the normal, and I fully expect your internet to go up by another $20, $30, $40 in a year or so.
It's crazy that the quality of service continues to degrade or at best stay the same, and yet your prices still increase.
My internet is basically the same it was in like 2005. My downstream is faster from very specific services, namely Steam and Yandisk and stuff like that. But the vast majority of American services are so cluttered and throttled that I really don't get any better speeds off of them than in 2005. But I am actually paying about $80 more than I was in 2005.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. You know what else is crazy to me is the fact that speaking of internet like bandwidth caps or whatever, I'm streaming this right now, and on the page for this stream, it's playing my stream back to me at max resolution. And like, why is it doing that? Why? Like, imagine if I had a data cap and I was trying to get some streams going. Like this is feeding right into what we're going to segue into anyways, which is just wastefulness, where you have some fucking free computer cycles. Let's add some Bitcoin miners.
Yeah, I read some articles offhandedly. I was talk to you about that. That the sort of just let me down this little rabbit hole I went exploring, and apparently in certain Linux distributions, if you actually look at the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pointless dependencies that get tacked onto random things, you're actually going to find stuff. I think one of them was actually a like bot. It was a like bot for a specific tweet from Taco Bell, and it would like their post when you installed this dependency on Twitter. You had no idea that was even there, unless they actually like manually went through all the shit that was being installed through the dependencies. So, you know, the Bitcoin miner thing and stuff like that, it's very real. It's very, very, very real. There's many, many games on Steam that to this day are actually running Bitcoin miners. And the vast majority of DRM is probably an elaborate Bitcoin miner anyway, since it doesn't do anything to actually stop piracy. And most people who use production software actually use pirated versions of the production software after purchasing the license, because the DRM is actually notoriously destructive and even capable of bricking disks. I can't remember which one specifically. I think it was related to Sonar, but I may be wrong. It was something I read some years ago. But
there's also those games that I think are running something called Star Force for DRM that's like famous for that too.
Secure ROM is really bad as well. One thing that I ran into personally, very, very infamously, was the expansion for Supreme Commander Forged Alliance, shipped with a DRM that was literally removed the day afterwards by the developer, because it was typically the publishers that were putting DRM and stuff back then. So the developer pushed a patch to get rid of it. But until they got rid of it, the game would actually crash my entire system randomly when I was running it. And then once the DRM was gone, lo and behold, it was stable again.
Reasonable.
And I've seen a lot of crying about Denuvo. That's a new one that I've heard some conflicting information on, that shipped with Monster Hunter World and some other ports, that is apparently very, very heavy on system resources. So
I just can't get wrap my tiny American brain around this whole American trend anyways, because you'd think that if you want people to, you know, not pirate your game, then maybe you would make something that is good enough that they would feel comfortable spending money for. I mean, people who are poor are they're not your consumers anyways, right? So I don't know. I don't get this. I never got the the license or anything related to DRM.
It makes investors feel happy. Like it really just comes down to the investors. If people cry about piracy and make a big deal out of it, and then the developer says, "Hey, we have a way to stop all piracy by implementing something," or typically the publisher in this case, the investors will be like, "Okay, we won't worry about it anymore." Because the investors are typically, like, most developers are very uneducated about gaming. I mean, just looking at the products is enough for that. But investors are even less educated about gaming. They just want something that's going to be pushing their product or otherwise benefiting them. And they see piracy as this, basically slave trade thing going on that's sinking their ships and stealing all their cotton pickers and otherwise making a huge mess out of things. They don't actually really do any research into how and where and why piracy happens. And then you have the inverse. You have what was their names? Red, whoever made The Witcher. They're like, hey, we
CD
don't
Projekt
have.
Red.
Yeah, that's it. CD Projekt Red. And they're like, hey, we don't have DRM, and they turn it into a reverse publicity statement. And then all it really goes to show is that the DRM doesn't do anything at all. It just pisses people off.
Yeah, ironically enough, people are actually voting with their wallets to pay for products that don't have DRM. It's like the opposite of what these people are arguing DRM does.
And Steam is the worst DRM of them all. Like, you have no guarantee you're ever going to have access to that stuff forever. And I believe they're actually dropping Windows XP support as well. Which
Yeah, if they haven't already.
That's going to destroy a very large number of legitimate purchases that people have paid for. It's just going to instantly disappear, and there will be no real recourse from that, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the Steam games, if you try to run them outside of Steam, they have some sort of at least the modern ones have some sort of built-in shit that
they
stops
force you to launch Steam, so you'll need some kind of executable modification or something to change that. It's probably very easy.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I'm sure it's documented by the people who swim in those circles. My issue with that whole ordeal is the fact that, I play CSGO very casually, and while I didn't have internet for 2 months, I spent a lot of time playing these offline bot games. However, in the last 2 days before I got internet, when I tried to launch it, because I guess it had been so long since there was...
I couldn't phone home.
Yeah, I couldn't phone home for so long. It said that the Steam verification was invalid or something. Yeah. So I don't know about that because I couldn't connect to the Steam network at all.
That's actually a huge issue in production software as now. A very large number of them are actually transferring to a subscription-based model because licenses don't make them enough money. Because the vast majority of these programs are basically feature complete and have been feature complete for quite a few years. Like, say, for example, Photoshop, 3ds Max, so on and so forth. Those have basically been feature complete since like the early 2000s. There's every now and then, little tweaks or new features or things polished up, but most of it just amounts to bloat. This is why you see, huge, massive license updates, like thousands of dollars, to basically have something just adjust your colors and change your layout a little bit because they've been feature complete forever, but the developer needs to make money still, and they're not making money off of a product that's been finished since 2002. So a lot of them are actually switching to subscription-based things now, which means you cannot even use the program unless you're paying a monthly subscription for it. One of the major exceptions to that I'm personally aware of is actually Substance Designer. They had a Steam release a little while ago, which I do actually own. It's one of the few pieces of these software I actually own. And when you purchase the Steam release, it functioned like every other program, like, say, for example, RPG Maker. In the event RPG Maker actually receives support, which it doesn't. But if it did, it's basically, an update is published. I get the update because I've paid the 150, however much dollars to own the software. But now they've transitioned away from that. They've deprecated that version. They said, okay, if you want updates, you actually have to pay us. But at least you can still use the program, even though you haven't kept an active subscription. I believe a large number of them do not function that way at all. So that's just the way to paralyze people into using stuff. Now, I haven't read extensively into it, but there's actually a large number of software that actually requires hardware to start. It's called a dongle. The dongle does actually have an origin beyond just Crossfire and stuff like that. You actually have something in your USB slot that handshakes the program when it starts, and if you don't have that, you can't even run the program. So this is why I said why a lot of people who actually own the software still resort to using pirated versions of it, because it's simply more convenient for them as the consumer to use, and that's insane.
Yeah, looking to unofficial sources for what you otherwise legitimately own, just because of some third-party nonsense is that's like peak Westernism, isn't it?
It's crazy. It's like they're so obsessed about, basically grabbing people by the hand and then shackling them to something so that they can't go anywhere and just be stuck with this. Like, take, for example, Apple. Apple's very bad for this. I talked to somebody who uses Macs, and hold on.
I think Mesk just realized that the person he talked to wasn't a human being.
Yeah, that too. And I have to go AFK for a second in a moment, but I'll finish this first. So he does work for Comcast and other stuff, and so he's not like he uses a Macintosh, so he's sort of like subhuman, but at least he like sort of knows his way around like web scripting at least, and he would service his own hardware if he could. So he has issues with his hard drives. His internal drive is actually dead for whatever reason, and I actually think like in all the cases he's described to me, it's just that Apple uses a lot of planned obsolescence in their software side. So what he could do, I told him, is take out the internal drive and plug it into something else and see if he can access his data that was on it. But that's actually not that easy with these Macintoshes, apparently, because this is the problem with phones and their laptops and stuff as well. I'm sure everybody is well aware of the fact that Apple is in like this arms race with third-party dealers trying to develop screws that can't be opened with traditional screwdrivers. And then you have these third-party sources that release screwdrivers for these screws. So Apple tries to get into more and more and more elaborate setups in which their hardware is actually designed in a way in which you actually open it, you actually just destroy the entire system. I can't remember any specific examples since it's been a while since I've read up on this, but there was some there's like guides and videos and stuff that detail about taking these things apart and the elaborate process you need to go through. And the way that the hardware is laid out is very much intended to prohibit the consumer from servicing their own hardware so that Apple can charge them hundreds and hundreds of dollars for simple stuff like flipping a switch. And now I have to go AFK.
All right. I was actually not aware of what Mesk was describing with the screws being unopenable, inoperable, but without like designer screwdrivers. That does, I guess, fit the bill of Apple because everybody always says that everything that they use is more expensive for seemingly arbitrary reasons, just because it has the Apple sticker on it, like their Lightning cables, for example. Anything that you need to charge your phone or transfer stuff from your phone to your MacBook Pro is always like $10 or $20 more expensive, if not basically like 1.5 to 2 times the price of what a equivalent would be for a Samsung or other third-party non-Apple device. And as far as the planned obsolescence argument goes, I definitely agree that it's a thing based on my experience with just headphones, for example, where people have described on YouTube and other places, you can just search like how to fix my headphones after they've broken, and it does require like usually requires like some soldering or something, so it's usually out of the reach of the average consumer in terms of like the tools that you would just have lying around. So it's a bit of an investment if you wanted to do this. But apparently things like the headphone jack are not necessarily designed to fail deliberately, but they're designed in such a way that if you just buy something for like $3 from Radio Shack, you can hook it up and it'll last you like 3 years, at least in most people's, like the average consumer in terms of the level of care that they put on these things compared to the 3 months or less that you get out of the average pair of headphones, at least in my experience. So that to me was a bit of an eye-opener when I looked at that a long time ago. And to get things back to the discussion about just general bloat and excess, the reason why we started off this conversation about what the Western mindset with regards to the internet issue is that the whole story that we never ended up getting to was that the reason why I didn't have internet after those initial 2 weeks was actually because the internet company called my aunt, who currently owns the she was at the time the executor of a state, and so she had the final say in a lot of different things, but one of them should not have necessarily been the internet policy and like whether or not you can install a new thing of internet, especially since we live in the house, right? And so she doesn't live here, and she was not making the final say on it, or she was able to make the final say despite not living here, and that to me was pretty insane. And apparently they broke company policy when they called her to begin with, because they weren't supposed to call her in the first place, which is really just insane to me. And so basically my internet got delayed by an extra month for no reason, basically. And part of it was me, because I actually could have called them the day after I found out that nonsense happened to begin with, and then just rescheduled again, and they would have just scheduled it. But I didn't know that. I thought I had to wait for somebody who would actually return my calls to become the executor, because that was still in the works at the time, because there's this whole stupid family drama that like sort of contributes to this madness. But the fact that that is even a legal thing in America just really is insane to me. And that actually begins our discussion on the insanity of the Westerners, I think, because shortly after or shortly before I got my internet back, after this whole rodeo sort of came to a conclusion, I was on the Team Liquid forums and I was in the Brood War section. Usually I try to stay away from there in general, but I was there for, my monthly patrol. And one of the threads that I saw was somebody asking essentially about missing features in remastered compared to 1.16.1, and how there was like some things that just didn't work as well or at all comparatively. And they were asking if they could do certain things just as confirmation of people who had already made the purchase. And people were saying, "Oh, it's free if you don't want the skin pack," and blah blah blah. But the protest of this opening poster was that he didn't want to download the extra 8 gigabytes for this skin pack that he doesn't own, because that is an extra 8 gigabytes he doesn't need on his hard drive. And the reaction of basically everybody who read that post and responded to it was, but you can get a terabyte hard drive for $50, so why do you give a shit about an extra $8, or 8 gigabytes rather? And that it might seem a reasonable argument by itself in a vacuum, but think about like the precedent that sets. And I feel like it's all related to this silliness of DRM destroying your computer and like bloat with productions or projects rather like Photoshop, programs like Photoshop, where they have been feature complete for a really long time, and yet the additions end up making it so that they continuously waste CPU cycles with whatever else they're going through, and they leak memory like Photoshop does now, which is
Photoshop
psychotic.
Is actually insane.
Yeah. And you get a situation where it's all just because like, oh, we have extra CPU cycles and hard drive space to eat up. So
just look at the internet. Look at fucking JavaScript.
Yes, JavaScript.
That's an even better example than Photoshop. If you want to talk about bloat, look no further than the fucking internet and all these websites that have to use like fucking thousands of lines of JavaScript because nobody actually knows HTML and they're too fucking scared to open a text editor. So we're just going to start hooking up a million fucking external dependencies and running oceans of JavaScript.
Gotta access all those different libraries. And then, while we're at it, we'll get a chat client that runs an operating system.
Oh god, Discord is just cancer. It is just absolute cancer. And I don't understand why you would make a chat client out of a fucking web browser. Like, I went from using Trillion, which was already considered very bloated for its time, using 120 megabytes, to Discord that regularly uses up to a gigabyte. And there's nothing fucking going on. The most that's going to use your memory is the little tiny icons people use for avatars. But that even on a huge server, it doesn't account for a gigabyte. Discord resizes them before they get pushed. So it's just all bloat.
Yeah, it's just stupid stuff that's invisible to the...
And what do you get for it? The voice chat uses fucking speaks and makes every microphone that goes through it sound like a piece of shit because they're still strapped behind fucking Apple and they're still using fucking speaks. That's all Opus is. It's just speaks. It sounds just like fucking TeamSpeak and Skype. They're notoriously garbage and prone to bugs. You know what still works to this day without any of that problem? Ventrilo. You think people would at least try to compete? No.
No, because you need money for a Ventrilo server, don't you? So.
No, you don't. You
can
run it locally. It uses very, very little bandwidth. Unless you've got like 10 plus people talking and it's 2006, then HKS did struggle a little bit back then, but on most first world internet today with a big server, you're probably not going to have any issue.
Well, I might have to get that then for the future podcasts. Because
it's a world of difference.
Yeah, the audio quality here is just garbage. But, the other issue is it's a lack of consistency, but, where you'll just fade out. Remember that, like, long 6-month stretch of time where because of that game detection issue, you just would get cut out for no reason for, like, the next day?
Anything. Like, it was acknowledged in countless occasions as being an issue with the fucking game detection. You turn it off, it doesn't even fucking turn it off. Like, that tells you how good Discord actually is. And it mysteriously disappeared just without any announcement. So it certainly wasn't a bug fix. It probably just some interaction that stopped working between my innumerable times I had to switch between the developer version and then the normal version because one would actually just flat out stop working.
Well,
Discord is garbage. It is actually the worst chat client I've ever used. And I've used fucking like GameSpy and shit. That was better than Discord.
Was Skype better than Discord?
Skype was better than Discord. It was garbage. It was a real close second runner.
You
but
haven't used the latest version, which is like Microsoft.
It kept logs.
Skype. Yes, all those logs were at least local. I don't think any of the logs are stored locally after you close the program in Discord. They just get uploaded straight to Tencent.
I'm sure they're local in Tencent servers.
Yes. That is so fucking crazy, Howd.
Oh, yeah, I brought up NCIX too. That's worth mentioning. Actually, I should mention it anyways in case any of our viewers are Canadian who used NCIX. I highly advise you get in contact with your bank account or whoever is in possession or acts as your credit card holder if you used that service or ever placed your information on their servers, because their server database from the beginning of their company to the end of their bankruptcy was entirely in plain text and was sold off to China. In numerous sales were made, and it was transferred digitally. The physical hardware was seized, but the information itself had already been sold. There was an article about it on I can't remember what it was, but it'd be easy to find anyways. And then there was an announcement from the RCMP about that. But so that plain text includes actually enough information for identity theft to be committed upon the employees. They in particular have to be really scared, but if you have any financial information you ever shared with them, now is the time to change it before you invariably find Ping Pang or Pajit taking part of your weekly earnings.
Why is that even a real thing? I don't get it.
You know what I don't get is the CEO wasn't some nobody. He actually understood networking and networking security. So this is actually just like intentional maliciousness on his behalf. And then there's the landlord who owned the warehouse this stuff was in that was also a compatriot in this and giving away the hardware and stuff that most certainly, should never have been distributed. So I really, really hope there's some class action lawsuits that come up for me to take part in, because I will. And if that ever happens, I'll definitely go into detail. But it's... in all likelihood, nothing will happen. Nobody will be held accountable, even though literally over 200,000 people's, like their actual credit cards, their information, every single thing was in plain text. It wasn't like hashed passwords. This is like their actual shit was just blown right out there. It was never stored in a secure manner.
That's so insane to me. That's like putting your bank details or something in a text file on your desktop.
Yeah. That's exactly what it was. So now that's all out there.
That's so insane.
It's crazy. It is absolutely insane. And I think it's one of the worst data breaches I've ever personally heard of. Although apparently Google breached something in Google Plus, and over 500,000 people's personal information was sent out to the wild. So there's that as well. And that's actually why they shut down that service.
I didn't even hear about that one. That's a good one.
You're talking about big patches. Well, there was something I saw in Discord I sent you earlier, which is apparently Call of Duty Black Ops 4 requires a 40 gigabyte patch on day one.
50
gigabytes, sorry. So it kind of brings me back to, I believe, Titanfall, where people complained about that game being very large because of their audio. And more importantly is that this game is still one of those ancient archaic games where they don't understand how to use deltas or patching processes. A lot like Blizzard and Relic, where they actually have to uncompress the entire archive and then recompress it. So it's saying that you need over 112 gigabytes space just to patch the game at all. In addition to downloading 50 gigabytes, which, as we just discussed, data caps are very much a thing in third world countries like Canada. So if I, for example, was running some Black Ops 4, to download 50 gigabytes would be something that if I was actually actively releasing videos right now, I would actually be very concerned about that, because I could actually just get fined a very large amount of money for going over my bandwidth cap. So it's it's absolute insanity. And unfortunately, it's not really just a matter of just about buying another hard drive because files are big. It's really people trying to make excuses for really, really bad design. Like, for example, disk users have to download and install a day one update. That's 50 gigabytes. Disk users. So these are people who are in possession of the physical release of the game. They have to download 50 gigabytes. So 50 gigabytes is actually larger than the Blu-rays that's on the PlayStation 3. Now, they should have just gone the route that Blizzard went with the release of, I think it was Lich King which had like 9 CDs or something insane like that. I remember I installed off of 9 CDs. It took forever, but I didn't have to download 50 gigabytes to get the game to run.
No, I don't even
So
think the reason why they did a day one patch is because of the fucking CD stuff. Like they didn't have enough CD space. It's probably just because they couldn't finish finishing the game when they distributed the CDs, the physical copies,
yeah,
and then they had to
that's
finish
very
it
likely.
afterwards.
The obsession with day one patching is really hysterical because all it does is just show how poorly mismanaged their company really is, where they end up releasing things that are like openly admitted to being extremely incomplete and needing day one patches to even function correctly. And in a lot of these games, like as we have seen in like God of War Ascension or Darksiders 2 and stuff like that, there's severe bugs that endure in those games for years after such day one patches that can prohibit the game from even working correctly at all. So it's rarely issues like that. It's literally just they released an unfinished project and here's another few gigabytes of data to try to patch it together as fast as possible.
I am so baffled by the whole thing. I just like when you really think about it, it's just mismanagement and incompetence, isn't it? It's like a cover for that, right? Because you're basically doing this smoke screen of massive, like just wasting, your players' CPU cycles and hard drive space. I cannot get over the fact that if I understand what you said correctly, downloading a 50 gigabyte update actually requires 100 gigabytes so that you can patch it.
That is precisely what that says. So what happens is, now this was Blizzard's case as well, and Relics, is that you've got the update and then you've got the archive. Well, the thing is they don't know how to actually just add that data into the archive and call it finished. So they're actually going to extract the entire archive and then merge that extracted data with the new data and then make a new archive out of it.
As opposed to...
That's why you need over double the space of the actual patch. It's because it's not just the patch data you need space for. It's for the actual archives and stuff it's going to be fused into. At least in the cases that I observed. I'm not sure if that's a specific case for Black Ops 4. Given that the article states that you need 112 gigabytes to actually update it, it alludes to something very similar at the very least. It's just people don't fucking think about what they're doing. Now, let's take a step back further and look at it, more real-world disruptive examples of people releasing stuff without paying attention. League of Legends. They've brought up cases like Pantheon's Ultimate having debug strings attached to it. Now, Riot is a company that uses something called a public test environment. And the public test environment is basically where beta cycles get run. And the theme is really simple. You have people outside of the company playing for free who have access to this experimental information, and with more eyes on it, you should be able to encounter more bugs, more issues, and things you can fix, and hopefully try to release balanced heroes. Of course, in practice, that's not actually what happens.
Never.
With Riot, ever. And what actually ends up happening is they end up pushing stuff out that is entirely fucked up and didn't get cleaned up before getting pushed out. So you end up seeing stuff that gets pushed out that's even more fucked up that was on the public test beta, or has bugs on it that were reported on the public environment and were never corrected. So it's very, very common for patches in League of Legends to result in heroes being disabled, the servers going back down immediately, or other like severe disruptions. It was actually very, very predictable and very, very comedic for the entire duration of the several years that I played for any major patch to have severe issues that were like really like pants on head retarded shit. Blizzard is also notoriously bad for this as well, but I can't imagine that Riot's code base is anywhere near as convoluted and unwieldy as Blizzard's, given that League of Legends is an extremely simple game. But some of the stuff they have described in their various developer posts hints that nobody actually really puts any attention into stuff when they're starting, and you end up with a Jenga pile. And the Jenga pile is very, very sensitive. If a cat, for example, touches one of the bottom Jenga pieces, it's not like a GIF where it runs off with it. The whole thing does just come toppling over in an instant. And that's actually the case for the vast majority of commercial software. It's anything I've ever heard from people working in business is that business software is an absolute disaster. That's one of the reasons why the vast majority of machines in business environments are still running on like Windows XP, is because of stability and reliability, because touching that stuff would actually cause very severe problems. And in many cases, you're running on like ancient behemoth software and architecture that people currently in company don't actually understand how it works.
Yeah, you were telling an anecdote a while ago in one of the other episodes, probably in the first 10, where you discussed that somebody had gotten like a 1.5 times increase on their offered salary or something just because they needed them immediately to come in
Yep.
and fix some proprietary software that nobody had any idea how to work with. And
Yep.
I feel
The
like
guy
that,
responsible for it had left the company.
right.
They didn't have anybody on staff who could handle it, so they were desperate.
Yeah, and so it's probably a mixture of the fact that some developers are just absolutely lazy and they don't want to go back and update their old DLL files, or
Yep.
which you could say is maybe that's what's going on with Blizzard. I'm sure that's like a part of it, but another part is nobody's responsible for the Diablo 1 source code that's for some reason still kicking around in Overwatch. Has any idea? Like, they're not even with the company anymore, so you're not
Yep.
really going to be able to find anything there, I don't think.
There's just lunacy everywhere in the business environment. Because think about it, Blizzard Entertainment goes through interns like jet fuel. Their games ride on the backbone of interns. That's why they're so cheap to make, and why all the money just goes into fueling their office buildings. It's because they just have interns do all the work for free for their resume and then kick them out as fast as possible. And when you have like 800,000 people working on the same piece of software for 10 to 15 years, details definitely get lost in the work. Everybody has their own different workflow, and most of those workflows are terrible, much less professional. And you're just running into a situation where you have people trying to invest however many man hours just in trying to understand how something works to begin with. I mean, it's bad enough when you're, an experienced individual trying to reverse engineer things and you're scratching your head. But when you're in a business environment, you're supposed to be working with, a half dozen other people trying to determine things, and you're all completely different. And since it's a diverse, progressive atmosphere, nobody understands what each other is saying, and you all probably hate each other in the end, anyways.
Now you're
You
probably
just
speaking a bunch of different languages.
Yeah, different languages, people put on their pants on their head and wear different color shirts, and they all maybe just don't connect as individuals. And in order to have a successful, productive atmosphere in which people really actually mutually work towards things, it typically needs to be people who actually synergize in their workflow and just how they operate, how they operatively function in a production environment. Because you're gonna like, just even from a modding perspective, I'm sure you've encountered or read about plenty of examples where two individuals worked on a project, but it always seemed to just make more work for them in the end. So people do things one way, someone does things another way. Well, you're talking about a very complicated piece of software, and there's so many different ways to do one or two things, and there's only really like one good way to do it. But people have their own interpretations. You just end it with half-baked solutions, and then other people try to unravel that if they try to fix it. Like the lighting, for example, within StarCraft Remastered, there was no way anybody understood what the fuck they were doing with that. They just slapped together some middleware and hope for the best. In all likelihood, because they didn't actually want to get into it.
Yeah, anytime I'm thinking of team projects or team efforts, I am now immediately drawn to the example that you gave in your TFT recordings about Sons of War, where that just went completely downhill, and apparently the person Tarask, whatever his name is like responsible for roping everybody in there, but didn't even like wasn't even a founding member of the team. He like just somebody threw it in his
As
lap.
far as I understood it, anyways. I can't
Yeah.
remember some specific details, but I mean, it's all
It's
over the
just that
goddamn place.
when you have more than, I think, really more than one person is probably too many. You get a couple of dedicated testers or something. That's an asset that works because they're, essentially a focus group of specifically like trying to help you with one aspect after the production is entirely finished. Essentially, you're just going to be iterating at that point. But during production of a project, that's a little bit different. When you're actually producing and you're working on something, or for the example of we were giving earlier, where we were talking about. Business software or even games, when you're in the middle of working on something, there is very much such a thing as too many cooks in the kitchen. And for something like modding, I would always say like stick to yourself, or if you really connect with somebody on a personal level and you're very in tune with like what that person wants, and like you guys have similar tastes as well as just understanding how to speak the same language, then maybe that you can have like one or two other people. But that's usually very rare, especially since you're talking about people you have to be working with very frequently on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis for like a year or more. And that's a lot to ask to stay dedicated to the same project. It's a little bit different when you can rely on yourself, I think. I have no idea how these professionals, quote unquote, do it for their internships. I don't really understand how that works, but I guess the fact that we see the end
Numbers.
result being stuff like StarCraft 2, it doesn't work. Is like probably the bottom
Numbers.
line.
This is the Western mindset, is just to throw numbers at it. They just think, just throw brute force at it, it'll eventually figure itself out. So that's why you have these behemoth companies, these massive, like 100-person, 200-person, or more teams working on a piece of software. And while that piece of software may be very complicated, all that really highlights is the need to have, individuals working on it rather than 200 people. So you end up with this massive company, and like, say for example, Blizzard. Blizzard is a huge company, far too massive, and yet they still outsource the vast majority of what they do on top of it. So the staff they do have is not only piecing together stuff that was outsourced, but also like
Yeah, that they had
dealing
no
with
hand in.
ancient 20, 30-year-old code.
Ugh.
And the vast majority of them are entirely incompetent. And then they've got their heads so far up their asses that they are unwilling to actually like dial back and try to fix things they've fucked up as well. So they just keep pushing forward because that's what's more profitable. There's no real profit and trimming it down and focusing on quality. Regular releases is what's important. And there's actually a fairly lengthy subject I'm going to discuss in the part 2 of the World of Warcraft series, in which I was working on earlier, but haven't done so for a while, in which I was actually drawing all the comparisons between the phone games and, the pay per minute, pay per hour internet and the other sort of instant gratification stuff that came as a result of it. And what Blizzard has been doing in their games as well, and similar companies. And the Western approach to taking these Asian concepts of nickel and diming people and stuff, and turning it to something really, really wholly unpleasant for a player to go through. One of the really big examples I can name right off the bat is the world quests and the daily quests within World of Warcraft. But the very concept of time gating in general is very Western and really leads into that bloated, bulky, throw force at it mindset. Because although Blizzard has a very large number of people, they really don't do much work at all. So the whole idea of the game is to keep people paying as long as possible while investing as little resources into it. It's just smart business sense to invest as little as possible and get the most amount of reward as possible. If you literally can do nothing and make tons of money out of it, that's great. But one thing you're actually going to find is a lot of these phone games actually do have very regular, unique content updates, whereas titles such as World of Warcraft do not. And it's really, really strange. It's like I said, it's a really big subject. So when I need to actually like sit down and put together resources to really like convey in an intelligent manner. But it really makes you start asking a lot of questions. So the vast majority of Western games have dozens to hundreds of people plus outsourced companies working on it. So for example, Blizzard outsources their cinematics, and that's why the heart of this Orem final cinematic was leaked. It was leaked out of one of those external companies. And they also hire from DeviantArt to do their in-game assets. So there's very, very few people in Blizzard actually working on assets for their games. They copy-paste stuff out of commercial CDs for the sounds. They outsource a very large chunk, if not all, their graphics. Most of the people in their company are probably doing the more mundane stuff. Watching designer Dave's videos and hearing his commentary basically reinforces a lot of the things you can kind of make conclusions about within the game, but it's very interesting to hear a internal narrative that basically confirms everything that you otherwise didn't really have a lot of proof for. Things like there being lots of disagreements in the staff, things about companies and divisions within Blizzard just basically running out of control, and then other people trying to rein them in and just getting fed up with it. And how a lot of people in their company just mismanage resources massively. Like designer Dave described while he was playing one of the early human missions.
Yeah, I think the first one.
In which there was an individual named Tim. And he starts the mission by saying that Tim went through the effort of naming all these children after children from friends of the company, people who weren't even in Blizzard to begin with. And then later in the mission, towards the end, he says you can tell who was paying attention in making their maps because they would have the NPCs and stuff face each other while they're speaking. So on one hand, you have him saying there's this guy who went through this effort of naming a whole bunch of children, all these child's names of people not even related to the company. And on the other hand, he's pointing at a very big legitimate issue of quality control and consistency within their title, in which half the cinematics don't even have consistency in people facing each other when they're talking and stuff like that. So that like confirms a very, very large number of things that you can make conjecture about while actually viewing a demonstration of the product. It's objective in itself to make those conclusions, but you aren't necessarily sure why. You can only really, make guesswork as to why. And your natural conclusion leads you to people weren't paying attention. There's probably different people working on it, some of which paid attention and didn't. And then at the top of it, there was no actual quality assurance within Blizzard Entertainment to ensure that these things stayed consistent. And designer Dave basically hammered all those things into stone and said, this is actually what happened. And this is on the backbone of Warcraft 3 being at the bridge between Blizzard being an okay company and then turning into complete horseshit. Whereas Warcraft 3 had a lot of very interesting things in it, and it still had some high production values in some locations. But a lot of it, for example, the graphics and the voice acting and stuff like that really plummeted very hard. And you can see that within the product, but you ask questions like, okay, this is obviously companies released several products, and Brood War may have been a fluke, but it's their product. Surely they have an entire division of individuals dedicated to researching Brood War, its marketing trends, how it's doing today, what's making it successful, the general feedback regarding the title, the player base and stuff that's surrounding it. Like, this is all the kind of thing that plays into marketing and psychoanalysis and analytics and metrics and stuff like that. So it's very, very unlikely Blizzard did not have the tools to understand how Brood War was behaving. But they choose to abandon all that, and then they get really, 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 really lazy because they actually get extremely arrogant. Blizzard is a very, very arrogant company. And then they also throw numbers at it to try to make things go faster. But if we believe anything they say, that doesn't work out because StarCraft 2 somehow had 7 years development time, and it looks like it was just slapped together in maybe a weekend or two. You ask questions like, if you have 40, 50 people working on one thing, how does something take so fucking long to complete? Those people aren't working together. And designer Dave effectively said that, people aren't working together. He was a very casual individual, but many of the things he points out while he's playing make perfect sense. So you ask the questions, why didn't you have people play through the missions and just speak their mind during development and log what they're saying? Because that would be quality assurance, and that's company time and money and resources we don't want to invest because it's not going to ensure a release product. The Western mindset is very bizarre. This is really, really, really bizarre. And there's some things people were showing me about facial recognition software installed on cameras, like security cameras. And the facial recognition software is a part of gathering analytics and metrics. And what it does is it studies people's faces and their expressions and stuff and how long they look up products. It's about, establishing what kind of marketing is actually working. And what they ultimately are trying to do is they're trying to cut out the middleman of interacting with the consumer. They're trying to profile the consumer. They're trying to find that middle ground that says this will apply to the widest number of consumers without actually interacting with them at all. And nobody is even aware that they're on camera other than normal security kind of cameras. They're not aware that they're actually being profiled and documented and logged and stuff like this. But it's everywhere, actually. It's all over the place. The technology has been there for a while, and it's an everyday convenience stores and stuff like that. And now you look at Google. What is Google's primary business right now? It's not marketing through advertisements. Their advertisement business, as far as I understand, although it's very large, is actually not doing too well right now because of the prevalence of people who have become concerned about security through advertisements and use stuff like uBlock Origin. Google's biggest bank is through data, selling data, gathering and selling data. That's same with Facebook. They got their business by taking people's data and selling it to people. Because that data is more valuable to advertisers than actually communicating with their consumers. But when you think about games, what is a game about? A game is an interactive medium. So when you approach your design from the standpoint of trying to hit a checklist of things that your observations and analytics and focus marketing have told you to hit, rather than trying to actually interact, you've already set off on the wrong foot for developing your software. because you're not even looking at it as an interactive piece of medium altogether. You're looking at it from a psychological gaming standpoint. You're trying to game people's psychological, little switches, so to say, rather than actually interacting with them. It's a subtle thing, but you can see it in the vast majority of Western software. You mentioned the James Bond article earlier, in which I wrote an article. It was more like just an extended bullet point rant. Because when I was moving 4 years ago, I went through the entire roster of James Bond movies that was available to me at that time, starting from the oldest to the newest. And then about half a year later, I wrote an article about the conclusions I had made about those titles, just not like a per movie review, but more like the pacing and other sort of like little bits and odds and ends I noticed. Like how, for example, during like 1995 and 1998 with like Goldeneye, and then I think it was Die Another Day or something, we see some really, really huge shifts in the way that the choreography is done, the camera work is done, the timing and pacing is done. Everything's got to become faster, more intense. It's no longer about a spy navigating a building, trying to infiltrate things. So it's got to be fast cuts and social drama and all this other bullshit. And a lot of like the newer Bond movies aren't like really objectively really bad movies, but they are not Bond anymore. They have like no relationship to the other ones except their name. And what does that remind you of? StarCraft 2, Diablo 3. They share the name of the previous games, but that's it. Because the entire mindset behind what was used to create them is different. Is very, very different. It's like people who say, I'm going to make an esport. And you don't understand that in order for a game to be a successful esport, it has to be a successful game first. Competition is derived off of people mutually enjoying things and then trying to best each other in them. People then start, in most cases, playing stuff like StarCraft 1 exclusively because they want it to be competitive. Nowadays, that is more popular because, for example, when StarCraft 2 was a failure and all the professional gamers realized it was going to be a failure, they started jumping ship to other titles like League of Legends or Dota 2 exclusively to try to keep their business model afloat of being competitive players.
Yeah, right. It's the continuation of their career.
Yeah. Whereas the people who were already successful in StarCraft 2 and were at the very top, they were secure in their position. They were safe financially for that time. So they stayed there for a while. But most people realized that StarCraft 2 was not going to get off the ground other than Blizzard-funded shit. And it wasn't a big enough market for them. So that's when they switched. But I think that most people would say that they don't want to do a job unless they're actually really going to enjoy it. And in all likelihood, these people who are professional gamers that are trying to make decisions to try to keep that business model afloat did enjoy games before they played for professional reasons. And that's definitely like the vast majority of people. So when a game developer goes off and says, I'm going to make an esport rather than I'm going to make a game in which you can compete in, you can already know that game is not going to get anywhere.
Your comment about games sort of bearing a name, but not really bearing any other characteristics of that game beyond like, genre comparisons or something, really reminds me of the Prey game that I played recently. This game called, it was just called Prey, and it was released in 2017. You wouldn't know it by looking at it, of course. But the production of like my playthrough of it, I remembered that there was a 2012 game called Prey, but I didn't make any connections to it. It was actually absolutely nothing like this game that I was playing now. So I figured it was just it's a single one-word name, so whatever. But I did notice, and I am a stickler for these kinds of things because I feel like there's a lot of power in what you name your production. And I noticed that there was no real interaction with the name or concept of a prey, like what is a prey creature compared to a predator or whatever. Like there was nothing really like that in the game itself, and so there was no real connection to that narrative. And on the Wikipedia article for that particular game, it does list that Bethesda, the publisher, pitched or like received a game pitch or something for whatever Prey was originally called, and said, okay, call it Prey because we have an IP called Prey. And releasing another game with that name will be another marketing thing, basically. That's a little bit of my editorializing from reading between the lines, but just that was really insane to me that this game it plays nothing like the original. It's way more mobile and has like these. It's like Bioshock basically. It's like a Bioshock clone or something, and there's really just nothing about it that's similar at all to the 2012 Prey. And in fact, the Wikipedia article itself even states that there's the only similarity between the 2012 Prey and the 2017 Prey are that both games involve playing as a human who's being attacked by aliens, which is like what kind of what kind of link is that? I guess it was meant to be like they pitched it as a reboot or something, but it had nothing to do with the franchise to begin with, and so that's just
the
very
entire
insane.
logic of product placement. I recommend you read up on product placement because that is where a lot of the investors come from, is product placement. That's why, for example, you're watching OSL or something, you can see a lot of those advertisements. Or, for example, on streams where people are endorsing certain products as product placement. Because brand name is something that psychologically holds power if it's recognizable. So that's really like the only thing that keeps Blizzard in business. You can't look at StarCraft 2 or Diablo 3 and if like some random person posted this on Steam, it would never get off the ground. They would never ever see anything more than most
They would be
marginal
mocked
success.
at.
Yeah, it would just tank, just like Grey Goo and everything else. And you know, is Blizzard's logo that keeps them afloat, because there's, for some reason, still people who think that if it's Blizzard, they make good products, because they've deluded themselves into thinking that, because Blizzard did at one point make decent products. But things change over time. The staffing changes, the goals change, and the products change. But people would rather still like to live in the idyllic fantasy world that Blizzard makes good games, rather than, think, well, maybe Blizzard doesn't actually make good games anymore. But more and more people are starting to realize that, especially with overweights. A lot of people have realized that they've been had because of the really, really, really poor mismanagement of overweight. But also Diablo 3 as well, I think, was a big eye opener for a lot of people. But there's still a lot of people who basically are living by the brand name. It's Blizzard, I'm just going to buy it. There's a very, very frighteningly large amount of people who impulse buy things within these titles. The whales, for example, which I believe we've discussed a few times.
Yeah.
Whales are impulse buyers, especially. And brand name has a lot of influence over that. So, for example, I talked to some people. I would classify them as Tumblrites. They are Tumblrites. They're liberal Tumblrites, and they're still interesting individuals to be around. But their purchasing decisions always make me scratch my head. So, for example, they play a game called Final Fantasy XIV. It's an MMO, much like World of Warcraft. It's basically a carbon copy of World of Warcraft. It's just running in a 2006 engine instead of a 2001 engine. And much like World of Warcraft, there's a cash shop within this game. And the cash shop has features such as, for example, the ability to change your appearance for, I think, $20, $30 a pop. Or something around there. It's pretty expensive anyways. So the other day, I discovered that one of these individuals had actually changed their character's gender from female to male. They had become a cat boy. And while it is true that when you first create a character, you have a couple of free appearance changes, this was not the first time they had done it. They had actually spent this money. Now, this is an individual. Recently, her husband had some financial troubles, and they were living on very hard times until very recently. So they were still kind of like shaky financially. So to just on a whim spend $20, $30 or something was actually kind of crazy. But this wasn't actually the first purchase of the month. There's many other similar purchases off the cash that these individuals made in this game. And then this gender change on their character did not last for any longer than a week, and they ended up buying another one to switch back.
That is so crazy.
Like that's actually very small scale too. That's a very, very small scale. For example, like I'm sure I've mentioned several times, there's an individual I talked to some extent to who had spent over $1,000 at any given sitting on Grand Blue Fantasy, which is a phone game, rolling for a character in that game. And actually, one of the things I want to discuss in this regard, let me get out my tablet here. Since I've actually played a number of these games in the last near year now, these individuals impulse buy like crazy, and especially since in this case it's actually not their money. I had some extensive conversation with these individuals. She didn't feel as bad spending this money because in part it wasn't her money, And so it was much like psychologically easier for her to justify spending it. Although interesting conversations with her husband, as her husband, what did he want to buy? He wanted to buy something, and she kind of got angry at him and was like, "Hey, that's money we really don't have to spend." And he's like, "But you bought this and this game." And it was really it was like a friendly joust between lovers, but still some like interesting contention between them on their purchasing decisions when both of them basically amounted to microtransactions within titles. And now I still remember when microtransactions were first becoming a thing, how much people hated the concept, and now people try to defend it at any given point, saying it costs money to make this stuff when it really doesn't. So I recently started playing a game that only recently came to the West within the last month and a half or so. It's called Azure Land, and it's basically a lowly ship girl farming simulator. And it's like every other phone game in many, 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 many different ways. In one of them is the gacha. It's like gambling. It is literally gambling. In fact, the reason why these games tell you the drop rates is because you're legally required to within China, I believe. Otherwise, the
Yep.
vast majority of people, especially in the US, don't actually tell you the odds. So you may have remembered that Belgium had a recent legislation regarding loot boxes, and Blizzard's response was actually just to take them out of their game in Belgium altogether, rather than conform to the laws, because that's the kind of company Blizzard is.
Wow.
So
They're afraid of distributing the odds, maybe, or
I think it was the odds. It may have been. Don't quote me on that because I don't remember entirely. But Blizzard doesn't want to ever publish their numbers, ever. It's the same reason why they never discuss anything to do with their ELO adjustments or the system related to it, because it's very bad, and they know it's very bad, and people know it's very bad. But actually publishing those numbers would start some nice Reddit-esque witch hunts. So these games, if you're not familiar with phone games, I know I may have explained it before, but I kind of just want to go over it again because we were talking about Westernisms and the things that come into it. These are more popular in Japan at this stage, but considering that Japan is much smaller than the U.S. in terms of the the population, when we look at these things moving into the US, these games are being pushed very, very aggressively into the US to the point that many of these businesses are actually running these games at a loss right now. I believe that Fate Grand Order is actually being operated at a loss in the United States at this point in time, or it was in the past. But they didn't care because the Fate franchise as a body is really massive. It can keep it afloat. And they know that eventually, once it catches on, they're trying to access a bigger market. So, what is that market? What is the market for a free to play phone game that you don't generally need to pay money into progress, and some of them you do, like Puzzle and Dragons? Well, it's the gacha, it's the bait. So the vast majority of people will never actually play these games because they know that they're gambling bait. They know that they're going to suck their money dry, and most people are consciously aware of the fact that they're bad impulse buyers and don't want to get suckered into these things. So I'm going to just pop into the shop here right now, and I'm going to list off some numbers to you. So all these games use their own special in-game currency. It's usually a gemstone or something like that. For this game, it is gems. So to purchase 300 gems, it would cost me $4.99. So with tax, say about $6-7. So let's just say $6 just to be safe. Okay, so 300 gems. Okay, so what does 300 gems get you within this game? You're wondering. It's probably quite a lot, right? Because $6 is like a quarter of the price of an expansion for a game like Brood War. 600 gems will get you, let's say, 22 wisdom cubes that you can use for rolling for a character, just one character. So we've got a goal for one character. Let's say, for example, the current event that's out right now. It's I don't know what it's called, but there's drop rates in here. So let me list off the drop rates for you. So the drop rates for the one rare unit that you can't get outside of farming, you have to roll for it, is 2%. It costs 2 wisdom cubes to roll for that 2%.
wow.
So if you want like a rough estimation of what that actually equates to in terms of raw numbers, I used over 120 cubes to get that character. So I did some math last night, and I think that put me around $70 to $80 worth of cubes. I didn't pay money for them. I got them through free. So I didn't spend $70, $80, but if I had spent, I would have spent that much money to get a single character in a game with over 100 characters.
Yes, and this is just a character within a game as
Yeah,
opposed to
it's
buying
basically a JPEG
multiple
file
games.
and a small animated sprite.
Yeah.
And some voice acting.
Right, and remember, it costs money to make these things.
Yeah, so the other thing is 2% is actually a very high drop rate. This game is actually extremely generous on its roll chances. Very, very generous. Let me hold on one second. I'll boot up Fate Grand Order for you. That's the worst that I personally know of, and it's the biggest I think in Japan right now. So this is the game that in which I talked about an individual, and the reason why I bring this up specifically Westernisms is because these games use a lot of stuff that Westerners are either copying off of or invented themselves, and one of them is the time gating. There's a huge amount of time gating behind the stamina system. So to actually play these games, you usually are using a consumable resource, stamina. Now, as an idea, I can play Fate. I'm a level 116 or so in Fate Grand Order. I'm very, very close to the level cap of that game. I can do the highest level content. I can fight 3 or 4 times at high level, and then I have to wait about half the day to be able to play again because I have no stamina, because that's how much stamina it costs. Now, in Puzzle and Dragons, you can do one dungeon at my current level in that game, about level 180 or so. Something at my current level of difficulty will cost me nearly my entire stamina pool. I'll play for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then I can play again in about 4 or 5 hours or so. So the time gating. So in games like Fate Grand Order, you can get consumables that will restore your stamina. That's more generous. In Puzzle and Dragons, you can't. So each game is a little more unique in how it gaze you over. But the time gating is really the biggest thing. That's what MMOs and stuff are all about. That's what StarCraft 2 is all about. StarCraft 2's missions are all divided into timers. They're all there exclusively to waste your time. Exclusively to waste your time. The gimmicks and stuff are all there to make the missions take some number, usually around 15, 20, 30 minutes. They tried to make StarCraft 2 as fast as possible for some reason. And the marketer said, hey, your average mission time should be around like 20, 25 minutes. It should be a 3-stage progression. And you got to have the meme unit and then the gimmick to try to distract from the timer. But you guys had a discussion in Special Bus a couple days ago about how basically all the, or maybe it was in voice chat, all the missions in that game are basically timers. And that's precisely what it is.
Yeah, well, they're rarely organic timers that are linked to actual gameplay either, which was the big issue that I had personally with the concept. But I do think that there's something to be said for making it so that everything is timed out in a specific way, like you're saying, because, you know, if you're just trying to, like, obscure some sort of gimmick or something, or obscure the timer with a gimmick, rather, sorry.
So in Fate Grand Order, the main currency in that game is Saint Quartz. So 1 Saint Quartz is going to run you $1.39. With tax, that may as well be $2. Okay, so 1 Saint Quartz. You get a little bit of bonus if you buy them in larger quantities because it's the bait to try to get you to spend more money.
Right.
Now, what
is Saint Quartz? A lot like League of Legends, actually, with their
very,
riot
very
points.
similar. It's very, very similar. So, what does the Saint Quartz get you? 1 Saint Quartz can be used to restore your stamina. Also, a lot of these games, particularly Puzzle and Dragons, are filled with gotchas that instantly kill you right out of the blue. And the difficulties are really, really, really badly labeled in that game, and they're not consistent at all. So you tend to get like instantly killed right off the bat all the time. And that isn't your entire stamina bar. So the game will always bring up a prompt. Do you want to spend one of these stones to revive your team?
Right.
So that's another gotcha to get you to spend that resource. You do get these resources for free, but it's very, very slow. I've been harvesting Saint Quartz in Fate Grand Order for about 5 or 6 months now. I have 200. So I actually have close to $300, $400 worth of Saint Quartz on my account right now. And what does that get you, you're wondering? Let's say I wanted to roll for a character. Let's say I wanted to get a character in Fate Grand Order. I wanted to get a waifu. It costs 30 Saint Quartz to do a 10 summon, which gives you a guaranteed 4-star. But it's not just characters you get out of these. You also get something called crafting essences. Crafting essences are only useful if you get a good character to put them on. And there's a very, very large amount of crafting essences. A very, very large amount of 4-star crafting essences. you're only going to get 4-star crafting essences most of the time. Let's look at the drop rates. Let me see here. This is one. Yep, this is right here where their drop rates. So, Saint Quartz summon distribution rate, 3-star, 40%. That's for both servants and crafting essences. 4-star, 3% for servant, 12% for crafting essence. We've already reached the same kind of numbers we're seeing with an Azur Lane, except you're guaranteed to get a character in Azur Lane because you're not building anything but characters. But the 5 stars in this game are 1%. But the crafting essence is 4%. So if you somehow manage to get a 5-star, there's still a 4 times more likely chance you're not going to get a character anyways.
Wow.
Keep in mind, you are paying $50, $60 for that, for a 10 times summon.
Yeah, just to get an opportunity to get a 5-star, right?
To maybe get a 4-star servant. In all likelihood, not. Because the odds are very, very severely against you. And now, once you've hit the 5-star, then we hit the character distributions. There's a rate up right now for Tamamo, who is a fox caster, 5-star. The chance to get her is 0.7%. That's considered a rate up. That's considered a higher chance to get the other ones because the other ones are 0.021%.
So they're a fraction of a fraction.
So the main thing that this game works is limited availability. What does that remind you of? League of Legends and limited availability skins.
Yeah.
The difference is that League of Legends, you could just straight up buy the skin. And it was less expensive than trying to roll for something in this. So we've gone through different layers of faggotry to get to where we are now, where people will actually spend $1,000 trying to get one character in these games and they don't even get it. And then it's a limited availability. So let's say, for example, you run Facebook and you have thousands of dollars just to throw at a fucking phone game. If you don't get it, you don't get it. The limited edition's over. You can't get it. Unless they rerun it, some months or years later down the line. And that is an accepted standard for games today. And if you think that's not going to apply to PC games, I want you to think again and look back at World of Warcraft, where you've already been suckered into time-gated shit, and you're already suckered into RNG shit, where all your fucking loot is run through multiple layers of randomization to make it take as long as fucking possible to get what you need to get. You need to get something that's Warforged. You need to get something with sockets. I think there's actually multiple levels to Warforging now. You need to actually get that piece of gear to drop in the first place, and let me tell you, as a Molten Core 40 raider, most gear doesn't drop that you need. And then you got to contend with other people to get it. Well, now there's personal loot, sure thing. So you still don't get anything most of the time. And then now your stats are randomized on top of it. Before it was just a piece of loot drops, you get it. Provided your raid leader gives you it. Now it's, you get a piece of loot and you pray to God, you actually get good stat rolls on it. And that is Warforged. And now its item level is also randomized too. I forgot about that. It's been a little while. But as the expansions have been released, Blizzard realized it wasn't enough just to have raid content and people get gear off bosses they kill. But now we got to randomize not just what gear drops, but if it's actually valuable or not in several different dimensions. And people have just accepted these ever increasingly large objects being forced into their rectums without even the slightest yelp of disobedience. And now on YouTube, you have videos with hundreds of thousands to millions of views of people spending money on overweight loot boxes, celebrating this destruction of natural selection. That is what gaming is now. That is what a successful business model looks like. You can't just blame Blizzard for this. Blizzard is doing what makes them money. Hey, if somebody wants to spend $1,000 rolling for fucking loot boxes, you're not going to say no. You're going to say, here's your loot boxes, buddy. Everybody has to blame for that.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons why I took such an issue with that Team Liquid post is because people are just allowing this sort of mindset of excess and bloat to, continue and to perpetrate. They themselves are perpetrating it by saying just go buy a 1 terabyte hard drive for $50 because your drive space isn't a valuable commodity anymore. Not realizing that what they're basically advocating for is lazier development standards and lazier standards for optimization and everything else. I mean, games are horribly optimized now because hardware is so powerful, and it's like we take one step forward, two steps back with this technology stuff because the technology does get better individually, but the people who are responsible for making the software that works with the technology to the first place, the hardware can only compensate for that so much for their incompetence and their laziness.
That's the issue with web pages. People are like, well, computers are more powerful nowadays. But this is the thing. This tablet, I think it's running like a fucking i5 or something like that. And it's got, I don't know how much fucking memory, at least like a gig or something. Like the hardware on that tablet is insanely powerful for something you just hold in your hand. My laptop is like a fucking Pentium 4 or something. It doesn't have like a candle to the actual processing power of this tablet. And today you think about that, that's nothing because that's how inefficient things have become. These phone games I'm running, their graphics are just sprites moving around. It is no more complicated than anything you looked at in Brood War. You know what? Most of them bring that tablet to its fucking knees. Whenever fighters come out in Azure Lane, it turns into a fucking PowerPoint presentation. Every single menu and skill activation and half the attacks in Fate Grand Order, even though there's only ever 6 units on the screen, 6 fucking sprites, they destroy it. The whole thing hangs. If a unit dies and another one spawns, the whole thing can hang for upwards of like 15 seconds. You want to know another consistent with all these titles? They all use cryware. It is inefficient garbage. It performs like absolute shit. And nobody fucking cares.
Cryware
Even
is
HKS has a phone. And it's much more powerful than my tablet. And they still perform just as bad.
Yeah, they rise to the occasion. The better hardware you throw at it, the more stupid it gets.
Because people just look at it as an excuse to be lazy. Well, when you're lazy in programming, it doesn't matter how powerful your hardware is. Look at Alice 1. That game regularly brought my computer to its knees. That's an Xbox port! It shouldn't even be possible for it to perform that fucking bad. But it does.
Yeah, Halo Wars 2 has the same problem. I mean, not Halo Wars 2. Halo 2 has the same problem on Windows 10 now, actually. It just brings it to
Windows 10.
like a 2 FPS crawl if you don't.
You want to talk about the West? Windows 10 is a fantastic example. Windows 10 is amazing. There's the whole telemetry thing, which in all reality is probably very harmless. But the fact that they have tried to hide what it does, and they have made such a shit show over it, just destroyed everybody's trust in Microsoft forever. And the fact that Windows has just regressed since was it like Server 2003 or Windows 2K or something? Windows has just continually regressed since then. Has done nothing to change a lot of the smaller like quality of life things, but just continues to add bloat and bloat and bloat and bloat to the penultimate bloat that is Windows 10 and the fucking app infrastructure, and the fact you need to be constantly looking over your back because Windows is constantly trying to do things without your consent, like turning automatic updates and a whole bunch of other shit back on without your ability to even control it. It is like, but that's what happens when you have market dominance too, is you literally can do whatever the fuck you want. And what are people going to do? Switch to Linux? Linux isn't ready for a desktop environment. Anyone who says otherwise is delusional. The average Joe is not going to be able to make use of Linux. And for most people, Linux doesn't offer actual features that support day-to-day work. Drivers is a really big example. What else are they going to use? Apple? Don't make me fucking laugh. Apple is even worse.
I think I would rather use Linux than Apple. If gun was to my head, I'd be going to Linux, I think. But even then, I'd have to micromanage my OS, and I'm pretty good on that, I think.
Well, the thing about Linux is for all of your basic things you do within Windows 7, chances are you're going to need to write a script for that.
Yeah, just like navigating your hard drive. Right.
And it's there's so many different distributions out there, most of which are just cancer. And it's like I said, it's just not suitable for a day-to-day desktop environment. And you don't really have much of a choice, but just basically stick to Windows 7 and tank it out, or try to make Windows 10 work. And it shouldn't need to be that way. Like in any sensible environment, you should be thinking, how do I improve my operating system? What's wrong with my other one? What would justify pushing out a new license, not just to the consumer, but to the enterprise? What are security improvements I can make? Quality of life stuff, performance. But stuff just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and slower and slower and slower because legitimate development takes time and energy, and nobody wants to do that.
Yeah, I mean it's a fucked up system because all they have now is this. It's the same exact thing as what happened with Photoshop, where I mean, you could say that it's been feature complete or close to it, where the only improvements that are left to make are small ones from like, I prefer the Windows 7, user interface, for example, compared to Windows XP. But Windows XP was a far more stable operating system, and so if you had to make me choose between one and the other, I would stick with what's stable and what actually functions. And instead of like iterating on that, they try to do this fucking app thing. And what really pisses me off about that is that you start off your login screen for selecting your user profile on your desktop when you start your computer on Windows 10 just sits there. You have to click around on it instead of just immediately being able to select your profile, because they have to figure out if you're using a touch screen or an Xbox controller instead of just assuming you or reading that you have a fucking mouse and keyboard plugged in. Like, it's so insane to me.
Yeah, it's just very messed up. Software just makes me so angry whenever I get into it. I mean, hardware is bad too, but I blame mostly Bitcoin miners for hardware's current state. They've definitely made a mess of it. But shit like Nvidia still being business. It's just, I don't understand how that company is still in business doing the shit that they do. But the software is so much worse. Is really, really bad. And I know in the corporate environment it's even worse yet, because you apparently have something called agile, where the goal is actually just to release as fast as possible and then just iterate forever without trying to fix stuff. And there's a lot of over engineering that goes on. A lot of trying to build problems and then trying to tackle them rather than actually tackling problems. They try to like make excuses to do stuff. And I had a lot of issues with that in terms of video processing as well. Within recent times, I've had to deal with basically updating my video pipeline to support more lossless quality, to remove a lot of dumb shit that's going on, like the chroma subsampling, compression, and other shit. And there's so much misinformation or lack of information regarding this stuff, because most people are just content to watch YouTube. And YouTube's quality is horrible. It destroys the color. It destroys everything. And it's handing you files that are like up to 40% larger than actually properly done in code. And it's more CPU intensive to actually watch. So there's like no redeeming quality of using streaming services or stuff like YouTube at all.
Yeah, it's just convenience.
And as a result, it's hard to find information. Like, it's hard to find real world information and demonstrative material that actually tells you the difference and different implementations and why there's a difference at all in some implementations but not other, between like Rec 709 and PC 709, YUV 420 and YUV 44. I could find different examples on that, and they're usually paired with statements like nobody needs to use this quality difference. And then I actually make my own tests, and it's like YUV 420 420 chroma subsampling halves quality in color. I think it was color or luminance. It was one of the two. Chroma, it's color. It halves the color data. So, like, for example, my World of Warcraft videos, the net result was all the text was different colors. And the red text for the unit plates, you couldn't even read it 90% of the time. I turned off chroma subsampling by using 444. The video size hardly changed at all, but suddenly you could read the text. And suddenly the scene wasn't getting arbitrarily darker for some reason. And suddenly everything actually looked correct. Like, you just start really scratching your head why this isn't common knowledge. It's because YouTube doesn't actually support 444. It only supports 420. So nobody has ever even like looked at their material and asked, why does this look different than the source? Where's the quality standards? Where was the desire to improve? And then the color space crap is like, you've never really needed the reason to have anything other than just RGB. But because people are still using color profiles for the fucking analog TV in the 70s, that's what
still
everybody uses.
that destroys me that they're still using that.
That's what they're using. They're still fucking crushing stuff to, what is it, like 32 by 226 or 235 or something like that. Like, things are still getting smashed, and that's the default functionality for 90% of shit. A lot of things don't even support full range color. Even though a lot of TVs have options for configuring the color themselves, why would you hand them anything except lossless data to begin with? But instead, the vast majority of software just assumes you're working with analog TV signals from the 70s. Because the reason why those were crushed, why those color ranges were crushed, is because those channels were used for data other than color information. It was actually because of the hardware involved. There's no reason that stuff should have persisted into the digital era. Yet here today in 2018, I still see regular recommendations to use TV range and 420 chroma subsampling by people who've never actually looked at this shit before.
It's an absolute simulation moment that it's called 420.
Yep, smoke weed. That's what we need to be doing in order to think that that is acceptable for consumer level video entertainment. Why would you use like a $40,000 camera and make a CGI or render something out or fucking play a game that was made in the PC color range and then distribute video media of it to a consumer in something that has had so much of its data destroyed and warped on top of it? Like, it's fucking hilarious. Like, I was when I was setting up stuff for my Skyrim run, there's a bunch of people in the Skyrim community who make videos just to show off things like landscape mods and textures. And whenever there is grass or trees on the screen, it washes out into absolute puke. That is what YouTube considers original quality, is shit just getting washed out into a sea of garbage because its compression settings are set to the fastest, lowest quality possible. And people think it looks good.
It's HD. Must be good.
4K HD 60 FPS, so it's got to be good. And the screen is just a sea of fucking macro blocks. Enjoy your 4K macro blocks. It's just like when you're playing Diablo 3, you haven't even gotten to like the worst cinematic for it yet, where their DivX compression just shits all over itself at every step of the way because they don't understand how video codecs even work. It's bad. It's bad. It's such, like, how many people watch videos on YouTube? A lot. And what you're watching is some regurgitated, bastardized pile of shit. You're not even experiencing what the game developers or the movie developers or anybody who actually made the original source footage intended. You're watching some stripped down, bastardized, regurgitated piece of shit. A crow just like took a shit on your window and then somebody hosed it down, and that's what you're watching. You don't even get the legitimate crow shit on your window to experience. You're just watching on some watered down pile of shit, and nobody even asks questions.
Questions take time and money.
That's not to speak of YouTube's incredibly questionable business practices, but like that's what I mean by the American standard is like people are like, "Oh, well, YouTube is convenient." But you trade literally one button click for a lack of convenience, something that's more system intensive to watch, something that is of lower quality, something that may not even play at all. When I was still using YouTube, I had so many PMs about people saying, this shit doesn't fucking buffer. Can you post the file on Mega Upload or something? Just constant. Over and over and over and over, and I couldn't even watch YouTube back then at all because it actually just blue screened me on random. When it was still Flash, it would actually just blue screen me all the time. And to this day, like if I want to watch something on YouTube, I just direct download it. I mean, I get garbage quality, but at least I don't have to deal with our player. I usually get better audio quality out of a direct download than otherwise. And but people are more interested in that instant gratification and that convenience rather than actually getting a high quality product out of it.
Yeah, I think that one of the main issues with YouTube is just that there's nobody who's like actually making content on these other platforms, right? Like there are like for example for the Joe Rogan podcast is pretty popular, and he mirrors every episode that he creates. It's streamed to YouTube live, but it's also recorded locally, and so the local upload or the local video file is sent to Vimeo and a bunch of other platforms. And so he has like a small viewer base, small compared to his YouTube audience, that do consume their content through these alternatives, which are certainly higher quality. To say nothing of any other specifics, like I think Vimeo does offer, for maybe it was Blip. One of them offers direct downloads as an option, and so I think in one of the platforms you can even opt to turn off the video stream entirely, or download or stream just the audio, which is good for podcasts because a lot of the times people will be, not paying attention to their phone when they're or their, browser, depending on where they're consuming it from. So like I'm just amazed that YouTube hasn't offered stuff like that. I guess now you can download videos in various different qualities if you have a premium YouTube subscription, and that's like
or if you just use an add-on.
Yeah, well,
anybody who's using fucking premium subscription should just be gassed at this point.
What I really can't stand is the fact that as a developer, somebody who makes content on their platform, if I want to download my own videos from like say a while ago, or even if I just misplace a video file but I want to download it and then re-upload it, of course it doesn't save the original audio, like the original file. It bloats it and then deletes whatever I uploaded. But
they actually do have your original files.
Well,
at least they did.
Well, at least right now, they don't actually offer you to download that. They give it to you in 360p. If you want to download it in HD, you actually have to use an add-on as the maker of the video.
Wow.
Or you have to have a premium subscription.
Back when I shut down my channel, I wanted some files off of it. And I had to do a lot of research to find these menus. They probably don't exist anymore. But they used to have an option to just download your entire channel of videos. But
yes, they have that now.
If there was any kind of copyright on them or anything, they wouldn't actually give you back the videos. They had them, but they wouldn't give you them.
Yes. So they have the same function now, but all it does is download your fucking thumbnails or something instead of the videos.
Yeah. These actually did give you your original videos, but I wasn't able to get the ones I wanted. Because
IGN owns your voice.
Copyright. Yeah. I can't get over that. Like the thing about YouTube is those aren't actual real DMCA claims. Because there is actually legal consequences for filing false DMCA claims, but YouTube doesn't use that system. They use their own system, which means there is no repercussions at all. So that's what happens.
Yeah, for the claimant, there's no issue at all.
That's like the copyright trolling. They just spam and hope people get scared and just let it go. But from what I have read and been told and heard about following Motendu and others, is the copyright system has actually gotten much more insane and much more biased against the victim since I have departed from YouTube, which was around 2011, 2012. Apparently now it's actually extremely hard to contest false claims. And you actually can just get shadow banned or just out of the blue without ever knowing it.
Yeah, so if you contest a claim and it turns out that this is like actual shit that's on the YouTube platform, when you go and say I get a copyright strike, I get copyright claims on my shit all the time from like people who have no business doing it because it's like gameplay footage or something. So it's just insane. But if I were to try to contest all of those, say I was an actual YouTuber who relied on ad revenue to make a profit or something, even though I don't make any money off of YouTube anyways. If that were the case, and these obviously I'm playing video games and uploading footage of that and some other stuff, the copyright claim will come in as saying, hey, we own this, or this audio file or video file that's playing during your video, so you get them taking all of the ad revenue from it. And what ends up happening is if you try to go and contest that, the language that YouTube themselves provide is that as you're like going through the very many different web pages required to submit a DMCA counterclaim or whatever is really just absurd, because what it says is if you like respond to too many and you try to fight back too many, and they're too many are ruled as inaccurate. Like you tried to fight a claim, and they found out that actually you don't have the legal right to do that, and so they take it anyways, even though you filed a counterclaim. If that happens like twice, your channel just gets terminated.
It's funny because back then I didn't make money. Like I don't make money. I've never monetized anything I've done. But like the option didn't even exist back then. So what these claims are doing is there are people just trying to put ads on there to begin with to make money off of my shit. And it was
Right.
just like basically shadow companies, people who didn't actually exist. If you went to their YouTube channel, you just see pages and pages and pages of people bitching and saying, "Hey, you don't own this. Stop flagging my videos." But YouTube is designed in a manner in which Google has no actual interaction with the entire platform, and they actually hire. And I use hire kind of loosely because it's not like a company budget thing, but they like appoint people to do their moderation, like just random YouTubers, just random people who run
Yes,
random
they're
channels.
called YouTube heroes.
Yeah. So, and they're just basically given omnipotent power to flag stuff willy nilly. And there is clashes between these people and individuals who post, say, for example, unpopular opinions. And it is like legitimate material, but they don't like these unpopular opinions. So they abuse their power to a great extent. It's also very, very possible to brigade channels as well to just mass flag them and they'll just be taken down,
Yeah, almost happened to me.
regardless. Yeah. So the whole system is just completely off the rails. And then on top of it, you have Motendu. So if you're not familiar with him, I think his name actually might be pronounced Mountain Dew. I'm not really sure, but he produces gachi videos. So gachi is gay porn. It's evidently censored, but the whole subject of producing these musical videos, a lot of which are extremely elaborately edited. I highly recommend watching the International Wrestling Festival 2018. Except you'll find that's actually been removed from YouTube because YouTube is very weird. But this guy has over 50 million views. He's one of the biggest people you're going to find in this business, and any given one of his videos has millions of views on them, and he's he's big, he's well known, and out of the blue, YouTube decides to demonetize his entire channel, and this goes back and forth for a few months. There was, the concern it's a gray area because remixes, aren't really like defined legally or something like that under terms of fair use or something, but there wasn't actually like a legitimate reason why. But only when he took it to Twitter and was like, made a huge announcement and said, "Hey, I'm stopping making videos because the only reason I was able to sustain living and making videos apparently was by the monetization I got off of this stuff, and YouTube just wants to cut it." And only then did YouTube be like, "Hey, we reviewed this the second time and found we had made a mistake." They just hard backpedaled after the massive public backlash came in. And this is not isolated. There's apparently a lot of individuals who are getting just like their monetization just randomly revoked from them, regardless if it's from Google themselves or these YouTube heroes. There's just again mismanagement.
Well, a lot of it is also like artificial learning as well. They just have a
Yeah,
bot moderating most of this stuff.
yeah. It's like this guy buys people to help him make these videos, and I don't know how much they costed, but some of them are very elaborate. For example, he actually redid the intro of an anime, reanimated the entire thing to replace all the characters with Snoop Dogg, and that's called Weed La Weed. It's very entertaining. And watch the original anime and then his anime. His actually looks better. It's hilarious. And then I find personally the concept of making money off of videos to be really goofy. I don't really think you can really legitimize selling videos in any stretch of the imagination. Supporting people is a different story, but for better or for worse, that's how his platform functions. That's how he's able to make this content. That's how he's able to buy these people to actually help him put this stuff together. And for this to go on for a few years, and then the system just to suddenly try to yank it out from under his feet, and only backpedal after he makes a huge, public bitch fit about it. The whole system is like, it's not like some one-off thing. This is 50 million views. This is a huge person on the only real platform. Like Nico and Vimeo and Dailymotion and stuff. They're some of them have like decent points to their platforms, but they're not really true competitors for YouTube. They don't have the
No.
infrastructure or the means to really compete with YouTube right now. And YouTube sets such a horrible fucking example, or people are literally screaming for some kind of competitor to show up. And then even if a competitor did show up, a lot of advertisers may not actually move to there or may not support it, which means it still may not be viable for people who make content like this to actually use it to make money to continue to use it. So it like the whole system is so retarded. Like when you actually really get into it and see the interactions that are people going on where there is no interactions. People just are flying by the seat of their pants and just hoping that the system, the house of cards, keeps standing for another day. It is ridiculous. Like that's most certainly not how a business should be run.
No, I don't think there's any forward thinking element to this either. A lot of it is, like you were saying, reacting to public outcry, be it on, of a political nature, like a lot of the insanity that followed the 2016 election, for example, or if it's of this nature where you'll get this guy who mistakenly or deliberately was, demonetized and basically shut down in terms of his income, and then had to go and make this public stand and statement. I mean, that's something that I've seen so frequently in the past couple of, like, I would say the past 2 weeks, I've seen like at least 4 different high profile YouTubers come out who make their living on the platform. So they do this quote unquote professionally, and they have to come out on Twitter, a different platform that's not even YouTube. Like, which means that it is presumably they've like tried to interact with these people publicly. They always say that they have, and they have to do it publicly as opposed to privately, with their audience being privy to this interaction. And all of the replies to all of these tweets is always like, "Oh, YouTube fucks up again." They've been shit lately. I mean, they've been shit forever, but these people are at least catching on. Similar to story actually to the stuff about Warcraft 3 as well, I think.
So I put a video in a special bus. It's semi-related. It's something to watch at a later period, but it's more just YouTube shit. It's interesting to actually look up the kind of shit this company gets away with. The whole digital platform, since it's very young, is definitely prone to being exploited and abused a lot. And I really just wish that government and politics in general were a little bit more educated about this stuff, because companies like Apple and Google need to be hit hard, very very hard with antitrust lawsuits. In many cases, I would say even treason lawsuits. Just slammed hard, because everything they do is retarded. It's unbelievable. From collecting people's personal data without their consent, and people actually supporting that, to the lobbying system. But all we just really have is just widespread insanity all over the fucking place. So it's the West is really just an absolute mess. The East has issues as well. South Korea is very, very their internet rules and laws and stuff like that are a nightmare. Russia has good points and bad points, and I think Japan has some weird stuff as well. And then China is obviously very weird with their credit thing that they apparently did actually implement.
Yep.
But
Well, it's really interesting because South Korea is, widely regarded as a very Western Eastern country. Like they're very much, at least they know a lot about Western culture, and they happen to appreciate some aspects of it, or they're familiar at the very least. So if you're gonna like go to move to an Eastern country or visit one or learn the language or something like that would be one of the ones that most people say is their number one, because unlike China, well, for one, like the language is a lot harder to understand for if it's any other any Eastern language other than Korean, as far as I understand. But even besides that, you look at the just the culture; it feels a bit more connected there for whatever reason.
Apparently, they're
South
a very
Korea.
Christian-heavy country. It's like to the point of lunacy.
Oh well, I had no idea. That's one of those things. Is I never really religion is usually not brought to the forefront in Eastern countries. They're very much like a. Ironically enough, they're very zen about all that stuff. Usually leave it under the surface.
Well, South Korea is apparently one of the bigger exceptions, to the point that it has influenced politics quite heavily. I think they actually banned pornography or something there as a result of religion.
Well, I know.
At least there was being talked about at some point.
Yeah, Britain did that recently, and I know Japan has that amazing thing. with the whole
Japan
gotta
is
censor everything.
so very weird how they're trying to wage this war on pornography while hand in hand they're actually their population is dying off. So
Yeah,
they're very weird. Japan is such
it's that radiation,
a
dude.
very strange place. Like, because I was like watching videos of people just walking through Japan, no commentary or anything, and like just like out in like Tokyo, like the big cities and stuff, and it is so alien from here. Like, you would never see people walking outside here after dark. It is so unsafe. But I mean, we're the crime capital of Canada, but like I can't think of any Western place that I would feel safe walking out after dark unless I was, armed because it's unsafe. It is extremely unsafe, and here it is extremely unsafe. And in Japan, in these big tight cities, you have very little traffic. That's another polarity. Tokyo, thousands, tens of thousands of people on the street everywhere. Most of them are fit. A lot of them are young. And after dark, there's still a lot of them. None of them really seem aloof. There's very little trash, despite the number of people. Very practically no traffic whatsoever. It's just like it was surreal, and like the shops and stuff on the side of the street, they have like their goods on the side of the street and stuff like that. You would never see that here. That shit would be looted dry within seconds. It's like the culture differences always strike me as fascinating, especially between Japan and the States, because when it comes to the entertainment industry and stuff like that, the States, I mean, even Jay Barrino said it himself, games are just toys. They don't realize that there's business behind it, both in playing it and in making it. They don't acknowledge that there's forms of expression in it. There's just this, just this grab, this greedy grab to try and make as much money off the gullible as possible. And the West has always been about that when it comes to games. Even as far back as like localizing the Eastern games, the arcades are a great example of how the West takes something that was good and just destroys it. And the
Yeah.
East is very, very interesting, down to how these phone games have become so popular, despite the incredible potential for money sinking in them, and the fact that that is their business model, is to goad those individual whales that are willing to spend that much money, and the fact that that is the most successful business model right now is that one, where mobile gaming is growing and will probably continue to grow and outshine PC gaming, even in the West, within the coming years. And this is the model that is making it grow. And that part I don't really quite understand. Like, for one, I can't understand how people are stupid enough to spend $1,000 in a game, but can still actually have $1,000 to spend on a game. Like that to me baffles me. I mean, in a lot of cases it's not their money, but in a lot of cases it is their money. And I don't understand how you can have the intelligence to work a job commercially and successfully enough to have that much disposable income while hand in hand spending it on a fucking phone game. Just hire someone to make your ideal waifu simulator. It'll cost you less in the long run.
That would involve actually being creative. I went ahead and posted my own video, which is sort of related to Japan. A video that I watched about a week ago has an interesting look into the history and some of the weird insanity that was going on from like very early on in their culture, I guess. But outside of that, I feel like you did bring up Russia, and that's one of the things that for whatever reason, I have a number of Russian people in the server who have communicated to me what they feel their country is like when it comes to their internet like freedom laws or whatever. And apparently, there is actually a corporation in Russia that basically owns the internet or operates the internet or something to that effect, and they have near total like dominion over that, and are probably at least it's speculated by the people that I've talked to that they have a lot of ties with the government as well, and so that's like a case where the comparison would be like Comcast in America, but even they are like apparently don't hold a candle to these guys, just based on what I've heard, obviously anecdotes. But interesting that there's such a monolithic entity in the Russian space there. I don't think they're quite an ISP. I think they're like something higher up than that, like responsible for some of the infrastructure that the ISPs use.
Yeah, like a public service.
Yeah, but it's not run by the government. It's run by an actual corporation.
Yeah, it is The internet is really like, especially because it's so young and the political infrastructure of everything is such a disaster, and clearly nobody has any idea what the fuck they're doing anywhere. It is just a sea of just abuse and exploits, and most people just try to hide under like their VPNs and stuff like that, and even then you can't trust half the VPNs out there. And at the end of the day, most people just want to enjoy quality products, but then they don't like ask people to make quality products. They just accept for whatever distracts them the best, and yeah.
Yeah. What I feel like relating it back to the age of a particular platform. I mean, we've talked a lot about how video games are interactive media, and yet people, even though they've been around for X number of years, people still don't really seem to have a good grip on what the fuck they're doing with actual video games, right? They focus on like really silly story elements almost becoming movies, which is basically what you have with the walking simulators that are The Last of Us and similar games. And I feel like that's probably directly linked to the fact that they're such young platforms for expression. They're such young sort of industries, even if you can even call them that. And you compare that to the like the practice of filmmaking, which is something that I think you touched on in the James Bond article, is that it's been around for so much longer than something like a video game has, because films have been around since like the late 1800s or the early 1900s, I'm not sure which. And so the origins are at the very least nearing 100 years old if they haven't already gotten to that point, whereas video games are much younger by comparison.
When you think about it, movies actually originate all the way back into like stage performances,
right? Yeah,
things like that, which ancient origins.
Ancient stuff like
practice
fucking
for those has been around forever.
Yeah, thousands of years, probably longer.
And games are, as a concept, an interactive medium, and so many people try to pull away from the interactive part of interactive medium. And
right.
Even like I was saying before, at the design level, especially in the West, like the thing about these phone games is most of them are pretty simple, but a lot of them have far more depth and customization to them than the vast majority of PC games I've seen in the last 15 years. Like, to compare PC games, like Guild Wars 1 versus Guild Wars 2, it's incomparable. Absolutely incomparable. And it's just weird. The direction that things have taken has been very, very self-destructive. Even though the gaming industry is raking in tons of money, it hasn't resulted in higher quality products. It's rather just been like a polishing of the rod, of the turd, of depriving people from their money, rather than, finding out what excels in terms of product quality. And people just becoming more accepting of just eating shit, I guess.
A lot of shit eating in the West, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right, I gotta go AFK for a few minutes, so
we could wrap things up then if you have a moment to give any final thoughts that you might have.
Obviously, it's a long, long subject. I like to prefer to demonstrations above all else, but if you want a demonstration of Westernisms at its best, again, look no further than Diablo 3 and StarCraft 2. It's very, very excellent examples. I don't need to point out any specifics because the products really speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Anybody who really actually takes a while just to compare them is going to come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, that's one of the crucial things. Is it's a comparative, aspect, and that I mean, the issue is that some people have never played something that approximates a competent or good game, and so they've only played shit and they only know shit, or they've only played something that's mediocre, so they only know something that's mediocre. They don't really know what makes something better. But I think I have to imagine, at the very least, without losing all faith that I have for what is holy in this plane of existence, that even people who don't know what a good game looks like or feels like or have never experienced it would still be able to identify that something is missing from what they know. But I guess that's an element of psychology that I personally have not researched enough. It just feels like, when you're playing something like Overweight or Diablo 3, you would be able to figure out like what you're experiencing is not the be-all, end-all of the genre or of the platform, and that there's more out there that could be offered, that should be being offered to you as a consumer, that you should be getting your money's worth out of stuff, and that you're not right now. But that's also another massive subject, and even though it does directly tie into the Western mindset of bloating everything instead of just working on stuff that actually needs to be worked on, like Photoshop, etc., and even Windows 10, like entire operating systems. I think we can call this conversation done for now. We can pick things back up with our regularly scheduled programming sometime later on this week or next week when we get N on.
N!
Happy birthday, N.
Happy birthday, N!